You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to The Authenticity Show if you haven't already done so, wherever you get your podcasts. And please follow our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. This will help us. And that came with a please and a thank you. This episode is loosely about epistemology, or how we know what we know. What's the difference between inspiration and delusion? How do you know if the universe is trying to teach you something, or if you're just batshit crazy? Let's talk about it.
I think a lot of the struggle for many of us is, how do you know what you know? You know?
Oh, yeah.
And it's very easy to just either over-question it or don't question it at all, and you kind of believe everything. Mm-hmm. You could go either way with that. But then there's also this middle path. Speaking of Buddhism, there's a way of maybe finding that you can satisfy some aspects of your rational mind while exploring what's possible. And that brings along a set of ideas that I think are quite curious. I mean, this idea of, like, how do you know when you're deluding yourself?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's a good point. How do you know when you're deluding yourself? You could look for coincidences in the world, and think that a coincidence is actually a literal message from the universe telling you something. Or you could look at the coincidence as just being a coincidence and everything's just random, right? Or there is that ability to accept both simultaneously at the same time.
Yeah.
And sort of take that middle path again and say, hey, I don't know if the universe gives me messages.
But if it were.
But I can behave as though it was a message from the universe, knowing that it may not be. And I don't have to be crazy to take inspiration from it.
Indeed.
I don't have to be crazy to learn whatever lesson there is to be learned from that experience. Sometimes it might be crazy to miss an opportunity to learn something from an experience.
Yeah.
I like to look at it like a piece of art. I know that if an amazing artist painted a picture, that they didn't necessarily paint it with me in mind, me and my personal history, and me and, the things that are going on in my life and my fears and desires and, and all that. They didn't paint that picture for me to teach me a lesson. But if that artist tapped into something real for them, and then I look at that painting, I might find some inspiration. I might find some coincidence or some synchronicity within that painting that I can learn a lesson about that could actually change my life. And I don't have to fall into the quote-unquote delusion that it was for me in order to learn that lesson. I can say, hey, I just learned something beautiful from that amazing piece of art.
Yeah.
We do this all the time with movies or books. If you read a novel, the novel's a piece of fiction, right? If we watch a movie, the movie is also a piece of fiction. There's still life lessons that are embedded within the novel or the movie that could actually change a person's entire life. Even better, perhaps, than if the movie was literal, if it was in actuality, a documentary or something like that, where the person learned a real physical lesson from a real person, you still can learn. I reflect on movies, like I remember when I first saw The Matrix. I'm like, wow, I never saw the world the same way. Now, that doesn't mean that I have this delusion that I actually think I'm living in a simulation and that there are, like in the movie, you know what I mean? But I don't have to have that belief in order to have gained a new perspective on my own reality.
When we draw inspiration from things, it reminds me a little bit of Carl Jung's teaching. So most people were under the impression, I think, that Carl Jung was just talking about metaphors as being psychological manifestations.
Uh-huh.
But then his Red Book came out. I mean, there were always rumors about, this story or that story about his youth and his upbringing in the spiritualist tradition and things like that. But it's not until they published his private works, the Red Book and things like that, where you see that now here's confirmation that he believed in his experiences. In a sense, he was practicing mysticism.
Sure.
And it was his desire to integrate what he was learning and discovering about psychology and the mind and the deep mind. But he deeply respected and loved the subconscious.
Yeah.
He felt that the subconscious was a highly moral, empowered place inside of you that can be trusted. Whereas, his predecessor, Freud, was scared of the unconscious and thought that if you let it run free, that it's going to do terrible things. So there was a different underlying attitude that they both shared, even though Carl was Freud's pupil.
Yeah.
Carl Jung deviated very far from that, and it was a rift between them. It was part of what was the rift. There were other reasons too.
Yeah.
But even that, because mainstream psychology circles didn't think that Carl Jung meant what he meant about universal unconscious and archetypes. Whereas you find out later, no, he actually saw archetypes as living systems, that really existed in and at some level of consciousness that was real.
Yeah, Carl Jung's, concept of synchronicity was based on this idea that, so you could take a coincidence. If two events happen that seem to have a relationship, that's a coincidence. But there was no meaning behind it. But then his idea of synchronicity was more along the lines that two events can be related not by cause, but two events can be related by meaning. I love that concept that there is this world, maybe more of a world of mind, where things come from, and two events that seem very unlikely to have occurred at the same time, yet have this profound meaning between the two of them, that's synchronicity.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting stuff,
Yeah.
And to come back to like what we originally started talking about with this is, how do you know you're not crazy? When you start to see things like that, because we've both experienced situations where that somebody is actually having a mental illness.
Yeah, for sure.
And they believe they're Jesus, and and they're doing strange things, and they're taking their clothes off at Walmart, and it's poses a problem, for society, So I guess a question that I have for you, Carlos, and maybe we could share our strategies. How do you know? How do you know? Because I know you and I have talked about times when we've both felt something very deep, something that's coming from a real truthful place, that maybe is the world somehow trying to teach me something or teach you something, right? How do you differentiate what is real in your experience versus, a false idea, a false belief that's not quote unquote real?
Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, I was driving down the road and the road began to look like it was wavering.
Okay.
Unusually so. The very first thing I would think to myself is not that the road is noodling per se. The first thing I would think is, why am I perceiving this way? What is it about my circumstances that's causing this unusual experience? The very first thing I'm going to ask, which of course would lead me down to a few very rational, plausible explanations. Did somebody dose me with LSD without my awareness? In which case, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
As long as I know. Am I having a meltdown or a neurological issue that's kicking in which case I might want to pull over and take some breaths and see what's going on. I'll check in. And the reason for that is the parameters under which that's happening are potentially dangerous to myself and others. I'm operating, or at least I am assuming that I'm operating a vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, now that we're on this topic, I could be at home sleeping in bed and dreaming of driving.
Correct.
But that question of, is this real, is a question of, am I dreaming in a sense? Am I in a state where the rules are more flexible, or am I in a state where the rules aren't flexible, but my perception has become flexible because I've shifted channels?
Yeah.
It's very important for me to be in sync or aligned with the place that I'm at. There are safe ways, as you know, because we're meditators, right?
Yeah.
There are safe ways to tap into realities that are slightly different channels, and there's very little risk in doing so. If you're laying down and you're astral traveling and having an out-of-body experience or something like that, there's really not much harm or potential danger you could be doing to yourself or others by doing so. Even if you, had a nightmarish experience, there's very little damage that could be done.
Yeah, right.
Whereas if you're driving and suddenly you're out of your body, that might be dangerous.
Yeah.
So without being afraid of that, I just kind of instinctively know whether I need to ask those questions. If I'm in that context where it could be dangerous, I'll ask those questions, and right away I'll come up with some kind of an answer.
Yeah.
And if I'm, take it out of the danger zone, let's just take it into, I'm with someone and I start, suddenly they leave, and it's like the next day, and suddenly I get this overwhelming sense of concern for them, or sadness, or a feeling of shock. And I feel it in my body, let's say I feel it in my solar plexus or my heart, or something like that. I've learned to pay attention to that. And I've learned to first stop and become very silent, very still, like we were talking about in the beginning, and check into that feeling. And I'll ask myself, what is this? What's happening right now?
Yeah.
And that allows my attention to go inward, and I can sense is this followed up by a bunch of sort of random thoughts that have maybe to do with why I'm feeling that, or is it just a stubborn, persistent feeling like a hunch?
Yeah.
In which case, it's prompting me to act. And since that person's not with me, the very first thing I'll do is wish them well. And then I'll check on them physically. And, whether it's like lifting the phone and giving them a call, or if they're nearby, I'll go to them and just ask them how they're doing, without alarming them.
Yeah.
And I'll say, hey, just checking in on you. And to say why, then I'll tell them, well, I just got a set of feelings, and I'm trying to determine whether it's just me and related to something else, or whether I'm picking up something that I need to be aware of for you. So since I care about you, I wanted to check in and make sure you're all right.
Nice.
And then ask them what else is going on with you. And then very often they might tell me, I'm glad you called. I was thinking about you a lot and feeling X, Y, or Z. And then it tells me that maybe I did pick up on something.
That's happened with you and me.
It has.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. I like what you said about stopping and like kind of going in and checking in with yourself.
Yeah.
I use a similar strategy to that. One of the things I do is I check in with it, and I notice, is this coming from more like thoughts and that inner voice in your mind, that inner chatterbox in the mind, which I sort of somaticize up in my head, or is this coming from a deeper place of knowing, which is shared in a wider space within my body? That's sort of my internal representation of it. Is this up in the cranium, or is this head, throat, chest, solar plexus, abdomen kind of a thing? And if I feel it in those places, then I know that I need to take that a little more to heart, a little more seriously.
Definitely.
I need to consider this with more caution. You know. The other thing that happens is you get a feeling like that, and everybody's had, most people have had some kind of intuitive feeling. then there's always a moment just right after that where the mind goes, oh, there's a feeling? Well, let me start to interpret it. And then it starts to chitter-chatter and just start to give you all the reasons of what it could be. And I always have to like separate that from the original feeling, right? Like there's what I initially felt, and then there's what my mind started to do with that feeling. And I sometimes have to separate those things, suspend the mind to go, now, okay, shut that off. Kind of like an experiment. There were 3 or 4 different things that could have been the cause of something. You have to sort of shut them all off and turn them on one at a time to see which one was actually causing it.
That's true.
And that's one of my strategies. It was kind of similar to what you're doing.
It is very similar, and there's a lot of overlap there. Throughout my life, not only have I experienced this myself, but I've heard other people experience this. Go to bed on a full stomach, and they have nightmares about someone. And they, I believe in my heart of hearts that really that all that disturbance that they were feeling is a mixture of being sedated in a sleep state, thinking about that other person combined with a terrible feeling in your tummy. Yeah. And the mind, what is the mind going to do? If you think of the image of a loved one and suddenly you feel pain and sharp feelings in your belly, and you're in a sort of a hypnagogic kind of space where your mind is a little bit fluid and you're very relaxed, you're very subjectively in a kind of an imaginative space of a dream, it's a no-brainer. You're going to associate negative feelings inside of you, which normally indicate danger or problems.
That's right.
You're going to begin to associate it with the image in your mind of that other person.
Yeah, you're going person, and then what is the feeling in my gut?
Right.
Oh, mine comes to a conclusion.
It's like, if a girlfriend dreams, of you, dissing her in some way, and then she wakes up mad at you, and you're like, why are you mad at me? She's like, because you did all this in my dream, and you're just kind of like, oh, honey, that was a dream. That's not the reality. And it's kind of funny, but it happens. And you know for a fact that you would never say such a thing to them. Yeah. But their fear kicks in, and it can happen for us too when we have an experience of something. Let's say after watching a adventure or horror movie or something stuck from that movie, and then later on you dream about that person, and you just kind of inserted their image into the environment, which was already a little disturbed, and suddenly you get not an intuitive message about that other person. What you're getting is a mixed, like a mixture in the story in your head.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Sort of like you get a spider on you, and then the next hour you feel every little tickle's a spider.
There you go. Exactly.
It's that
talk about ants crawling all over you, and suddenly everything under your skin is crawling. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and the head, heart, gut thing is really important.
It is.
It is really important. And if you connect to each one of those places, you are getting a little different data. I mean, one of the ways to harness intuition is to begin sensing the differences because they are different. Your head has a certain way of connecting with the world and understanding it. Your heart has a different way of connecting, and your gut has a different way of connecting. So there are other systems that are a little more subtle and complicated, like the Indian chakra system.
Yeah.
That's a more complex way of handling it, but just real basically head, heart, gut.
Yeah.
Those are different ways of relating to the world for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you train yourself to feel in those different areas, you get more sensory feedback. So you and I did a lot of Qigong and deep breathing and concentrating our mind on the lower abdomen and feeling a sense of warmth there and paying attention to how that feeling can spread everywhere. And we did a lot of blindfold training, you and I. And year after year of doing that, you start to pay attention to very, very small changes in your environment that you wouldn't normally notice. Yeah. And a person next to you may not feel it, but you do.
That's
so
true.
That's, it's starting to slide into the direction of, having a psychic intuition, because you're starting to sense things that other people would find invisible.
Correct.
It goes below their radar, but not yours.
Yeah. Right.
So how did you know that? Well,
right.
You're picking up data. It's sensory acuity, right? Sensory acuity means to have sharper and more refined sensory experience. So you have like the experience of hyperimperia. You know that word where hyperimperia. Yeah, it means to experience one of your senses as very, very. Let's say if it's a visual sense, it's very zoomed in.
Okay.
If it's an auditory sense, it's very loud. If it's a kinesthetic sense, you feel very sensitive to it.
Okay.
Hyperimperia can be suggested through meditation or through hypnosis. You can develop hyperimperia.
Okay.
And when you raise your level of sensory awareness generally, you are kind of creating control over that hyperimperia. You can notice the color shift in someone's face when you said something, and then that can mean something to you once you start attributing a pattern that you're discovering. A lot of intuition
Yeah.
is unconscious pattern detection. A lot of it is. They don't even have to
totally.
know they're doing it. They can say, I'm not doing that. But it doesn't mean they're not doing it. It means they're not aware that they're doing it.
Yeah. It means their mind isn't sure what the mechanism of action is.
Correct.
But they themselves know how to do it, obviously, because they're doing it. You know,
Yep.
This kind of reminds me of, Eckhart Tolle talks about the difference between knowing and knowing about.
Right.
Like knowing about means like, I know the chemistry of something.
Mm-hmm.
And then knowing is just my body's making the hormone, even though I don't know anything about the chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And this is an example of that. You know,
is.
my uncle knew a guy who was a soldier in the war in Vietnam, and became so acutely aware of sounds of the jungle that he could in a downpour of rain in a storm, 100 yards away or 50 yards away, whatever, he could hear a twig snap.
Yep.
Somebody's out there, right? And like as clear as though there wasn't a sound in the jungle.
Yep.
He could hear that twig snap.
Pet peeve time.
Yes.
Pet peeve of mine is when I hear frequently, oh, there's no way I could have known that. There's no way he could have known that. There's no way she could have known that. Excuse me?
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways a person can know something.
Yeah,
And it may not make sense to you right away because maybe your model of the world is such that you just need to slap an explanation over something that, is really not an explanation. It's just trading not knowing for a word that also doesn't mean very much. You say psychic. Well, what does that mean? Psychic means having to do with your psyche, right? It's a kind of a junk term. Do I believe that some people can develop extraordinary ability to sense things? Yes. So what's the problem?
Yeah.
I haven't dismissed psychic things. I'm merely saying that some of us have the ability and the technique and the know-how to develop it's not really extrasensory perception, but it's in a way it is because you're getting extra sensitive perception.
Yeah. Well
Some
said.
people, like Tom Brown, has extra sensitive perception. He can look at a track and tell what emotional state you are in at that time.
Right.
Now, that sounds irrational to someone who has no clue and who hasn't spent 30 years on their belly looking at tracks, training with a high-level tracker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, that sounds ridiculous to someone like that. And they're like, you know what, show me. Well, he consistently shows people.
Yeah.
So, and we've seen Tony, our Tai Chi teacher, do stuff that is mind-blowingly cool, right? And most people look at it and what do they say?
They say, oh, it's like some kind of magic or it's fake.
Or it's fake. Or
it's
that,
yeah.
that person just fell over. It doesn't seem real to them because they can't understand the mechanism, as you said,
Yeah.
how that works. Now, I run the risks, I think, of, sounding like I'm being disparaging to the topic of psychic awareness and things like that. And I don't, from the bottom of my heart, I'm actually not saying that.
Yeah.
I just want to get really clear on what I am saying. And maybe people who are in that department, or say people who would self-identify as a psychic or a medium, things like that, they're experiencing something, and I don't mean to disparage that. I really don't.
Yeah.
I've consulted psychics before. I'm not easily impressed.
Yeah.
But when I am, I admit it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they're doing what they're doing. But I just wanted to open the conversation because I think there's a whole realm of this stuff that could have different explanations. And I think it's wise to remain open in our explanations. Even some of the best psychics in the world, like in the remote viewing world, for example, even their results are only maybe 64% on a good day. It's never 100%.
Right.
So what do we hear a lot of psychics say? And I've been hearing this since I was probably 12. Okay. My intuition is always right. What does that mean? What does that mean? My intuition's always right. Are you saying that anytime you sense something, that means that you're deadly accurate, bullseye on interpreting what it means, and that you've never had an impression of something that you thought was true and it really wasn't? Or are you saying that my intuition's always correct, that it's picking something up? My interpretation of what it's picking up might be flawed.
Right.
That's what I think.
Right.
That's where I can agree. Where I don't agree is that people are very good at identifying the difference between their intuition and their feelings. Because what is intuition? Again, if we use the idea that the most sensible definition for intuition is unconscious pattern detection, which by its very nature, unconscious means you're not aware of how it's happening.
You're not
You're at least
aware.
not fully.
Yeah.
You might be a little more, a little less, depending on the circumstances. But if you get good at trusting your intuition, I do think that's a good thing. I think it's a phenomenal thing to be good at trusting your intuition.
Yeah.
But we don't want to be delusional and think that because we learned how to create a sensation of, let's say, our third eye opening, right? To open your ajna chakra, that through breathing and through directing your attention and creating a sensation, that suddenly means that everything you now perceive must be 100% true exactly as you see it. I'd rather say you do that and it's an art. It's a craft that you continually develop.
Yeah.
And it can give you added nuance and perhaps even information that you never even thought you could have.
Yeah.
And it might enhance your picture of what's going on. Like you know that I see auras sometimes.
Yeah.
For years. And there have been times when I've known that someone was ill, or I knew they had something going on in their left side of their head or whatever. But if I saw something and they said, no, I don't have a headache, that wouldn't necessarily mean I would say, oh, I should just give up on this. It means nothing.
Yeah.
I was picking up something. I don't know what that is. I'm not all-knowing. I'm not omniscient. I don't need to say my intuition's always correct. Just to say I perceived that. What it means, you tell me if it means something to you. Maybe later something will come. Who knows?
Well, it's kind of like saying, you walk into a room and you go, do you smell something burning?
Right.
And maybe we might misperceive that is the smell of something burning, but then later on we discover, oh, that's what it was. It was this thing over here, and it was something similar to that smell.
Right.
Doesn't mean you weren't smelling something from the very beginning. Just because maybe we interpreted the smell wrong.
I've read that we can detect, I think it was almost 1 trillion different molecules, but that the brain doesn't know how to recognize them all, but that our nose is sensitive enough to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And that our eyes can detect single photons of light in the right conditions.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
You have to be in a totally black environment, and you have to be motionless, because your motions create bioluminescence ever so slight.
Oh, yeah.
You have to be motionless. It takes training to be able to do it. But that when they've tested it, that they say we have the apparatus to perceive single photons of light with our bare eyes.
Okay.
And same with our range of our hearing. We can hear things that are supposedly subaural, I guess.
Yeah.
We're actually hearing it. And the body's responding.
Wow.
Like you can play a sound, for example, that produces anxiety in a person, and they can't hear it.
They can't hear it. Wow.
Or they're not aware that they're hearing it, but their body is aware of it.
Well, this is an experience that we had going back to Vipassana training. You start the course and you don't feel much on your body. 9 or 10 days later, somebody coughs on the other side of the room. You get a ripple of sensations flooding your body. You're like, that's not new. That was always happening.
Right.
It's just that our concentration was too gross to pick up on the subtleties of those sensations happening in the body, but they were always happening.
Now you're starting to get hyperimperia.
There it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, just to kind of recap what I just said, I'm not against any exploration of intuition or psychic phenomena, ESP or whatever, however you want to interpret ESP, all that stuff I think is really fascinating. I think we should keep looking into it. We should keep searching. I just, I'm not satisfied with the simple explanation that it's, that people tend to use when they feel like they need to justify their practice. I think, it just has to be understood that it's just one form of data. And there's other forms of data. If someone is giving you other forms of data and you had an image in your mind come to you, you don't ignore all the other data and go, well, I have this image in my mind, I'm just going to trust that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have the information, it's unlikely that if you have no data points about something and you receive it, it's unlikely to be true. So if you have no training in that particular thing and you're interpreting something very complex, you have to be careful. That's why you don't have a psychic do physical surgery on your brain, because they don't have the data, they don't have the training.
Right.
They don't care whether they think they can do it or not.
Yeah.
Because they believe that they trust their intuition 100%. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Intuition works with what you know. If you're a soldier and you detect, as you go by a cave, you detect that there's somebody in there, it's a good idea to trust that.
Yeah.
Because you may be picking up something that isn't easy to explain to the rational mind. You may be detecting something with your sensory system that is subconscious. You're not quite aware of it. But if you get good at trusting those little signals from your gut or from your heart or wherever else you feel it, maybe an image, that might be just the way that your synesthesia is happening in your brain, where the different sensory systems are coming together, and it may be communicating something to you in a way that's trying to get your attention. So you have to pay attention to that. If you meet someone and you get a funny feeling in your tummy, pay attention to that.
Right.
If you walk into it or you're getting ready to take a shortcut down a dark alley and you get a funny feeling in your tummy, don't walk down that alley, because you might be right. And there's more of a likelihood that you'd be right about something like that than, looking into someone's past lives and building a story about that. I mean, I'm not saying that's not true.
Yeah, exactly.
It might be, but I'm just saying it's much more likely to be true in the one case than the other.
Yeah, and you're right. I like that last piece you said, because you can clearly see that something like that is going to be constructed by the mind, whereas the other one, the one that
is there to protect your ass.
Yeah, is exactly. It's evolved over bajillion years, to be able to have that skill. One of the litmus tests that I use to know if I'm getting a signal, a message, a warning, versus delusion, is how surprised I am by the message or the experience. Like earlier we were talking about, if you're watching a horror movie, when you're in a creeped out state of mind, and then you get a feeling like, the movie's over and you're walking back to your car and you get a creepy feeling in the parking lot, that you can see how that was constructed by the mind because of the state that you're in. But if you get a feeling, if you get that spider sense, that Spider-Man sense out of the blue, and it surprises me, that's one of my ways of knowing, ooh, I better listen to this, because this seemingly came out of nowhere.
You weren't overthinking it.
Exactly. Because it's coming from a
flow state.
Yeah, from a flow state, or it's coming from a very deep primal part of the body that is very connected to the earth and is connected to survival.
Yep.
You got to pay attention to.
We probably talked about this in the Guts and Glory episode, but when they hooked those people up to all those different apparati, the brain frequency, the heart rate, the blood pressure, and the gut.
Okay.
And then they made the person make selections.
Okay.
Occasionally, selections would change, and what they would do is they would measure which system was operating when they were making that change. Well, what they discovered was the gut would shoot up through the vagus nerve a message to change the decision that they just made, and they would change the decision.
They would change it. Yeah.
Occasionally, then they would change from answer A to answer B or whatever. It was because of a signal coming into their vagus nerve from their gut. So we now know that there are signals that can be processed in different ways through the body, and that person, almost guaranteed, that person didn't realize their gut told them that.
Yeah.
They probably
right.
weren't paying attention, because most people don't pay attention to that.
Yeah.
They're not as mindful about their physical sensations.
Yeah. We've talked about this once or twice before. This is a good time to bring it up again, is the studies that indicate that people with spinal cord injuries don't feel as much fluctuation of emotions, whether positive or negative, than the general population. And so, I mean, obviously people with spinal cord injuries have the full range of emotion, right? But they tend to be a little more balanced in terms of, like, they don't get quite as upset, they don't get quite as sad, they don't get quite as happy necessarily. And the reason for that is because there is a physical disconnection between their head and their, wherever their spinal cord injury is, with the feelings that they're able to perceive in their gut.
They're processing with less processing power.
Exactly.
They can't use the rest of the apparatus.
That's right. They're not getting as many data points.
Yeah.
Because there is an actual physical connection that's broken. The phone's broken, And
it's really freaking easy to get caught up in the story you make about something. We love stories. Story's great.
We sure do.
But it can also delude us from what is actually happening.
Right. It's that inner narrator telling you that this story is this or that or the other thing.
Right. If you get in contact with a quote unquote spirit, and it seems as though you're getting spirit messages, doesn't it make sense to use some litmus test to figure out whether or not that's valuable information or it's just mental chatter?
It sure does. Yeah.
And if you think it's not possible to create an illusion, a hallucination, then you got something coming to you, because it's extraordinarily simple.
Oh, it's really easy.
You can do it. I mean, it can be done under hypnosis pretty simply, and there are other ways too. But the point is, if what you're hearing isn't inspiring you and truly helping you, if it's an unkind message, if it's a message that's generated from fear or anger or some kind of base emotion that is could lead to bad choices, let's say, choices that you regret, then why would you listen to them? Like if a person off the street told you the same thing and you weren't going to listen to them, why would you listen to it just because it came from a spirit? Let's say you did a Ouija board or something like that. Why the hell would you listen to that?
Right.
If it's just because they're in the other world, like that doesn't...
Right. We take one as having more value than the other.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if there are liars here, then presumably if there's another world, then there'd be liars there too.
Yeah, right.
Because where do they go, when they die? So that's another kind of example of differentiating between delusion and an actual divine, or let's say, what's another word from... a different word than divine, let's say an otherworldly understanding.
Yeah.
Like an inspiring message from the cosmos or whatever.
Right.
There's a difference. If the message is relax and trust that everything is going to work out the way it needs to for the system, well, chances are that's probably a positive message. So even if it's not true, it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's one of my litmus tests is, does the message promote life or does it damage life?
Yeah.
If somebody has a mental illness, and I like to use this example because it's one that people are familiar with, a mental illness, right? People with mental illnesses get ideas, thoughts, messages that seemingly are coming from somewhere. And a lot of times those messages are not promoting life.
Right.
A lot of times they're damaging life.
Yeah.
For example, if somebody gets messages that they need to hurt themselves somehow, that's a very powerful litmus test. If you're truly getting some kind of sacred, divine, otherworldly message, and that message is to hurt yourself,
or it's a message that aggrandizes your ego.
and that was the other litmus test I was going to bring up,
okay,
right?
yeah.
Does it
Makes sense.
is the message about self-importance, about making you stand out and making you better than other people, making you more special than others. Like, I'm the reincarnation of Joan of Arc.
You're the chosen people.
Right? Exactly. Things like that. Those are very, very, very likely to be delusions.
Yeah, they're suspect.
Yes.
If nothing else, because
Yeah.
you just, all you have to do is epistemologically ask that question. Well, how do I know that? And what would that lead to? And what does that mean in the ecological sense of the system itself? Like, if I think that I'm the chosen people, that means everyone else who isn't are not the chosen people,
not the
which
chosen
means
people,
they're in a
yeah.
very different category.
Yeah.
And you could make arguments, certainly not disparaging religions that say that per se, but I think that's a dangerous proposition to make, regardless of what religion says that.
Yeah.
And I think it can work out okay with good people who have a sense of connection, but it can also, it's sticky. Let's say it's a slippery slope. Let's put it that way. That kind of thinking could lead to problems. And if you lack the ability to examine your thinking around something, then, and you still insist that your intuition is awesome,
Yeah.
I would personally feel emotionally like I'd want to back away from that person, because that's a
would
person
too.
who could easily lead themselves to believe something about you that you never actually demonstrated. And all of a sudden you're trying to backpedal from something you never created in the first place.
Yeah.
Now they sensed your vibe or whatever, and it wasn't really your vibe. It was their projection.
Exactly. And
Because perception is also projection, right?
correct. And I'm thinking of an individual that you and I both know from many, many, many years ago in martial arts training.
Yes.
That was sometimes likely to lean towards that side of, I have special abilities. I'm very important, and that's ego feeding.
For sure.
And so that was coming from mind.
No one else has this.
No one else has this. No one else is like this. Nobody understands me.
If I die, it'll be lost forever.
Yeah, and that was somebody who hurt a lot of people.
Yes, it is.
That's somebody who hurt us.
And I don't believe that was a coincidence.
It was not a coincidence. Yeah.
That happened as a direct result of having and adopting that attitude. Or let's just say, if it wasn't the result of, it was certainly in sync with. That attitude, that underlying attitude.
And you and I and some of our close friends that came out of that, we did a good job of taking that coincidence and putting a lot of let me put it this way. We extracted a lot of wonderful lessons from that coincidence.
We did. We came out all right.
Yeah, we came out okay.
I'm
Yeah.
raising my glass to you right now.
Here we go. I mean,
We're all right. We got lots of work to do, but we did all right.
This show
so
wouldn't
far.
have happened any other way,
That's
right?
When you develop sensory acuity and you compare that with someone who hasn't developed sensory acuity, it does look like psychic information.
Yeah.
And technically, anything with the mind is psychic.
Yeah, because psyche is mind.
It's mind. It's
soul.
soul, mind. Yeah. It's so, if I combine just what I've learned so far from NLP with other things I've learned, there's a lot of data coming in. So I'm going to be perceived by some people as very, very intuitive.
Yeah.
Because I am using a lot of my intuition.
Yeah.
But it's in an area that I know about. I mean, when I used to lead the Chinese yoga classes and stuff, and we would do meditation, sometimes I'd say, someone after class say, yes, you had something you wanted to ask me. And they're like, what? How did you know?
Yeah.
Well, I could feel there was a shift in the experience with that person. Maybe it was a shift in posture, change in breath. Maybe it was a change in distancing. I don't remember all the details, but I just kind of trusted that I knew that they wanted something.
Yeah.
They didn't have to use their words, but to them, that was very impressive. To me, it's like, how could you not see it?
Yeah.
It's just sensory acuity, Or I was having a birthday, one of my most uncomfortable birthdays, I think, one of them, up there. It was a surprise party for me.
Okay.
And, I spent the day with a friend. We had a good time. We, smoked a couple bowls. We went swimming in the ocean. We did some martial arts. We had a nice meal together. It was really cool. And then later on, we were connecting back at the house to have a party. And I was feeling kind of tired from a long day. And, smoke a bowl. You want to kind of take a nap, take a shower, relax, and then kind of get freshened up, especially if you're going to see a bunch of people that you don't know.
Yeah.
Or, excuse me, especially if you're going to see a bunch of people you haven't seen in a while.
Yeah. Right.
You want to freshen up. You don't want to look all trashy and messed up and tired.
Yeah.
So this person tried to lead me into an area of the house that would lead into the backyard.
Okay.
And as I was walking forward, I got this sense in my gut,
Yeah.
a real physical, visceral feeling in my gut
Yeah.
that made me stop in my tracks. And I went, whoa. And all of a sudden my energy flared up. And it was like it's as if the hair on the back of my head stood up.
Yeah.
And I could just sense that I needed to stop and check in and go, wait a minute, what's going on? And then I looked at their faces and they were trying to figure out what to do. They're like, come on, and come on, let's go. And I'm like, what's happening right now?
Okay.
And then I realized, oh my gosh, they're doing a surprise party for me. Now I've got to walk into the backyard. This is my limiting beliefs told me. Now I got to walk into this backyard, feeling kind of tired and groggy from smoking and being unkempt and kind of, from a long day of exercising at the beach and things, and pretend that I didn't know this was about to happen.
Yeah.
And I had proceeded to have a very awkward 20 minutes of greeting everybody, moving from one person to another, barely able to access my speech patterns and speech portions of my brain, right? Because I was not only tired and kind of fuzzy from what I did before, but now on top of it, I was feeling kind of quote unquote amygdala hijacked, right? I felt like I was in a little bit of a panic state. Had I been a little freer in my thinking, I would have said, whoa, is this a surprise party? And if so, give me 5 to 10 minutes to go freshen up, get clear.
Okay.
I'll come back and we can do this.
Okay.
I didn't though.
Yeah.
Now that was my fault.
Yeah. Did you scold your gut for blowing the surprise?
No, I was feeling happy that all the qigong that I do, it counted for something.
It worked.
It worked.
Yeah.
It alerted me that something was about to happen to me that is an unusual thing.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's an example. And I must have picked up the physiology and the positioning of the 3 men that were there, or 2 or 3 men that were there, that were my friends. I must have sensed there was something awkward about it.
Yeah.
And I picked it up.
Yeah, you did. You did.
So, yeah.
Well, I've shared on the show, I think, I'm sure I have, the time when I got disoriented and slowed down right at a traffic light.
Yes.
And it turned out somebody ran the red light. They would have hit me right in the door going really, really, really fast.
Yep.
And I still, to this day, am not sure if that was me that picked it up or if something came in and intervened. My feelings on that are that I think it was something a little beyond me.
Yeah.
And
Seems like it.
And using our litmus tests that we're talking about, first of all, it surprised me. It didn't come from my own mind. You know what I mean? That wasn't. It preserved life, right? Afterwards, I felt humbled by it, not special. And if it was something special about it, like if I had this feeling, I didn't get this feeling like you were saved because you're special in the universe and you need to do special. It was like, oh my God, wow, I'm so thankful that I was saved.
Right.
And I'm not sure what this is about, but oh my God, wow. It was a humbling type of thanks. You know, I felt special in a small way.
Yeah.
You know, and so some of these litmus test things we're talking about, like in that experience, it was wow, like that to me, that's why I feel that was some kind of sacred intervention.
Indeed.
Gosh, so we get these things. So sometimes you can tell that it came from my training, it came from my senses being refined, right? And then sometimes it seemingly comes from beyond. You know, and there's room for that whole spectrum.
There is. Let's just imagine right now that you had two people, and the exercise is that one person feel your energy. What does that mean? Holding your hands just far enough that you can feel a shift in the air pressure, a shift in the warmth, a feeling of tingling, or whatever it is that you sense as energy, okay? Yeah. And you sensitize the person who's the receiver to what that feels like from different parts of the body.
Okay.
While that person's blindfolded, you continue to suggest to that person that they become lighter and lighter and lighter, more empty, more sort of like even a fly landing on them would send them in motion.
Okay.
You then begin to concentrate on moving slowly and pushing that person without touching them.
Got it.
And then that person A will move with your motion, even in spite of the fact they cannot see you.
Got it. Okay. So like, almost like you're using the atmosphere as though it were water, and you're pushing, and they can feel that change in energy or atmosphere or sound or whatever.
However
all
they
of
do
those
it,
things,
or all of the above.
Yeah.
So I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff, and also staring at candle flames and things like that to concentrate my mind. So my girlfriend's brother and my other friend, we would go to the beach at night. And I remember they were really fascinated with all this chi stuff.
Okay.
Just like I was, but they were newer to it. And I would be at the beach, and then they would say, like, watch this. And they would like point at me from far away, and then I would turn around suddenly. And they thought it was a crack up that I could, but they're also was impressed too that I could do that. And I noticed that it's a skill that you can kind of turn on and off.
Yeah.
If you don't pay attention to that, people can be pointing you all day and you don't notice it.
Yeah.
But if you're highly attuned and you're really keeping yourself very primed, then when someone does it, you instantly turn around.
Okay.
So it's just about how sensitive do you dial your senses down or dial your senses up?
Okay.
Your ability to detect changes, but still, how did I feel that from so far away? It's like they're up on the lifeguard tower. I'm down by the beach. It's not like where they're really close where I can feel the atmosphere change.
Right.
This is something else.
Yeah, this is something a little more subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah. This reminds me, and I don't know how true this is. This somewhere years ago when I was a kid reading, ninja books, ninja manuals and stuff. Is that one of the things that they had recommended is when you're sneaking up on an opponent,
don't look directly.
Look at the back of their head. Like you have to kind of like divert your mind and your attention as you approach them because they're going to pick up on it.
Right.
And there's truth to that.
There is.
It's
really borne out with experience. When we play games of tag, or we play martial art assassin and kind of assassinate each other at night, like those kind of mini little martial art war games we used to play.
Yeah,
out in the
fun
woods.
stuff. Yeah,
we absolutely. Develop that.
Definitely.
But now with my broken ankle clicking all the time, it's pretty hard to do that.
You click too?
I click.
I'm a constant clicker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in Ayurveda it's my vata joints.
Yep.
I can't sneak up on people because my joints pop.
Yeah.
So do my wrists. My wrists and my joints pop. So it's like, it's okay. It gives me an excuse not to have to be a ninja. So, because it's dangerous work. It's honorable, but dangerous.
Yeah, it is. I think this whole idea of like an intuition and inspiration versus like a delusion. I think it's useful to think about those things. And at the same time, like we keep this attitude, which is the open-minded skeptics, it doesn't mean that we don't believe. It just means that there are many ways to interpret the experience, and Sometimes the best way to interpret it is that it is a psychospiritual experience.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best way to experience it is, or to digest the experience is to think of it as something else.
Yeah. I like to think of it as a spectrum from strong disbelief to strong belief. And the sweet spot is balanced belief.
Yeah.
Right?
Appropriate
belief. Yeah. So like if you are standing on a tightrope.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, all the time. And you're holding that long pole to help keep your balance.
I do that all the time too.
Exactly, right? What is it that gives you that safety on the rope? It's both ends of that pole. It's both ends of that spectrum. And we have the ability to swing from one end to the other if needed. But I think the key here is that usually what's needed is a healthy balance of open-minded skepticism, which is, hey, there is strong belief that's out there, there's strong disbelief that's out there, and neither one of those are usually very useful. It's when you take the best of both of them and say, hey, I am open to the fact that this could be just pure universal magic. And I'm open to the fact that this could just be BS, or I need to stay in the world of logic and critical thinking. And where those two things meet simply means there's opportunities to learn. That's all. That's all
I
we're
walk
saying.
the line.
Yep, there you go. That's right. Yeah, the straight and narrow.
I walk the line.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. My name is Oliver Althoen. I record, edit, and produce the show. I also wrote our theme song, which you're listening to right now. And the interstitial music this time was from part of a long-form song I'm currently working on called Sunken Treasure. It's not available yet, but sometime in 2020, this will be released to the world, and it will be epic, man. Don't forget to subscribe to The Authenticity Show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. And you can find our website at authenticityshow.com. Thanks for listening, and have an authentic day.